as that information gap goes down, like you're sort of seeing the U.S. capitalize like on that a lot more than even some of the other countries are able to, just from a resource standpoint. And so I think that the U.S. has some of the hardest working, toughest runners in the world. And I know that a lot of Europeans don't see it that way. And it's going to be a rude awakening if they underestimate the U.S.
That was Josh Hoey today on the Running Effect podcast, and I'm your host, Dominic Schluter. Thrilled for this conversation and for you to listen to it with Josh. It's a good one. It's a fun one. Josh, honestly, I say this at the beginning of the conversation, but Josh has been on a tear. I truly believe that 2025 is his year. He's done remarkable things already, winning the Millrose Games, setting a national record in the indoor 1K, setting an American record in the indoor 800 meters. I don't know why I just said national record and American record. They're the same thing for Josh. But yeah, he's been on an absolute tear this year. And so I want to sit down with him, hear his story, hear insights and wisdom from his journey back in the day in high school. He set an indoor high school national record with a time of 1:47.67. So he's been really good for a long time. He's got fun stories with training with his brother growing up, training under his dad, even how his dad influences his training in the current state of things. Love this conversation with Josh. He brings a lot to the table. I think if you want to get better at running, this conversation is for you. Josh is going to teach you a lot of things about what it takes to run at the highest level, as well as how to take your running to the next level. If you enjoy this one, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, no matter where you're listening. This podcast is free to listen to. I will never charge money for it. So the easiest way that you can help us out is follow the show, subscribe to the show, give us a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. Cop some merch if you haven't already. And with all those notes aside, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Josh Hoey. Josh Hoey, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this evening?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm doing very well.
Some, maybe just me, but I think some, as in the running world, the world as a whole, could describe 2025 as the year of Mr. Josh Hoey. I think you'd be a fool not to agree with that statement. How do you feel about that?
I don't necessarily agree with that statement.
No?
I think Grant outperformed me this indoor season. He's my neighbor here in Flagstaff, so I tell people I'm not the best runner in my neighborhood. So
okay, but let's break it down. I'll make an argument. Okay, I'll argue against you for you. Grant was 2-time medalist last year at the Olympics. You didn't make the Olympics. This year you come out, you're on, 143. You win the races you have. And you put this in the notes, and I'm excited to dive into this in this conversation because I think your story is so inspiring because of the recent breakthroughs, even though you've been working for a long time, and maybe it's not as surprising to you. But I say it's your year thus far because, you tell people, do you know Josh Hoey? Even loyal fans of the sport back in October, they'd be like, maybe I've heard his name, but not really. You tell them in March of 2025 and everyone's like, yeah, that guy's the pride and hope of America's 800 meter.
That's probably a bit much for me to handle. I sort of see that as my indoor season is not over yet. So we still have one more race, and that's the World Championships. And even then, I'm fully planning on competing multiple times outdoors. And so, yeah, I think it's nice to kind of enjoy the recent races, but I'm excited to kind of keep going at it.
Bigger fish to fry. I love it. A year ago, I feel like if I would have sat down and talked with you and shared some of the accomplishments, you would have been pretty excited about them. But I talk with you now, and I'm not saying you're not excited about them, but I think you got bigger things on your mind. You got medals on your mind. You got, championships on your mind. How excited are you for the future and what that brings? And how important do you feel like it is to have that mindset that you kind of just mentioned there? Was I think outsiders do this big job of thinking about results constantly and exactly what I articulated there. Whereas the person itself is not finished yet. A lot more to do. Not going to rest on my laurels.
Yeah, I think especially after the Olympic trials last summer, we were going into it feeling a little discouraged, honestly. And we had been working really hard for about 6 months under my new coach, Justin Rinaldi. And it seemed as if the odds were stacked against us a little bit. We weren't really in great conditioning going in. And so coming out of that meet with a 4th place, a new PB, I think we were all thinking for 6 years, we've had this goal of becoming globally competitive, first becoming nationally competitive. And we've kind of run ourselves into the dirt multiple times. And finally having a result that seemed to indicate that there was so much more to go get really was motivating and inspiring for us. And so I would say that was sort of the biggest launch pad into like trying to become even more competitive. And so that's why we didn't really take much time off from the summer season kind of into the fall and now the winter season. And we've just had continually improved at really a steady rate. When you look at it week to week of training, it's been very mathematical. It's been very like charted and progressed. And I understand like it kind of seems like we've had these big jumps, but I would really say that it's kind of been a relentless pursuit. So
what would you say inspires you to chase after greatness?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, my faith. And I say that because this is a talent that I've been born with, I've been given, and I've made it my mission to inspire other people to sort of follow their God-given gifts by kind of making the most out of the talent that I have. And so, yeah, kind of looking forward to this outdoor season. It's like we're not really thinking too much about concrete results. Like we do have goals that when it comes to times and competitions where we'd like to be up there with certain people. And I think at this level, you kind of have to look at your competitors and be like, hey, I have to do what that guy's doing. Like, because if I can't, I'm not going to be able to even be close in a race. But yeah, we're trying to just make the most of what we've built so far and just kind of continue this progress.
What's that faith journey been like? And what's the process been like of coming to that conclusion of, this is a God-given talent. I'm going to try to explore it as much as I can and use this platform and my body to glorify God. Because I think a lot of athletes like have some sort of faith. Very few are willing to publicly speak on it. So I want to give you the opportunity to share more about that because it's inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say first and foremost, we're a very spiritual family. So I've been a Christian my whole life. And that has kind of been one of the foundations of our family relationship as well. But kind of as it goes into running, like we've kind of been through some very difficult times. And those were altercations with coaches, disagreements about how the training should happen, and ultimately going into repeated competitions thinking like, hey, we might be on the verge of a breakthrough, and kind of just getting shelled towards the end of the races and having that happen like multiple times in a row. It was a point especially in like 2020, 2021, where I was just feeling incredibly lost. Like I was so confused about sort of what was happening, like why we couldn't seem to figure out what was going wrong in each race. And so I'd say like that put a massive strain on my relationship with my brothers, my dad, and it became really difficult for me to like understand like why God was kind of putting me through this. And so I have told this story before, but kind of sort of going into the trials where we had kind of made some steps forward and then kind of seemingly regressed right at the last minute, right? Like when everything needed to be going well. Got sick, ran like 147 high in Atlanta late May. And I remember just thinking like, man, I was sort of praying about it, and it was just like, could there really be any sort of purpose or like meaning to this just struggle journey? Like it's just been kind of banging my head against the wall. And like, I think it finally clicked to me going into the trials, because I was like just so overwhelmed with like feeling at a disadvantage, where I was like, man, I kind of gotta just let go. Like I just gotta forget about it and just trust in God, because like I still know that this is a gift, and therefore it has to be like his plan for what I'm doing with my life right now. And yeah, I mean, it became a lot easier to kind of manage the pressure of being in that like very high stakes environment. And I think that helped me like with a little bit of a mental edge throughout the rounds. But since then, it has just been a lot clearer to me about like kind of what the mission is. And it motivates me to continue pushing.
Do you feel a breath of fresh air now that things are seemingly clicking, races are going well, you're probably running times you know you're capable of? How good do things feel in your heart now after some of these tough seasons and setbacks?
Yeah, I'd say that, and I've used this word a lot, but it's been really validating. It has helped me reconcile a lot of those past pains emotionally, but I would say like I don't necessarily feel like so much contentment in my heart, because I sort of know like it's become more clear to me how much more needs to be done. And so like I understand that we kind of run risks by sort of pushing training and sort of continuing the way that we do, but I sort of feel like this is our mission. So I'm just excited to keep going.
Backtracking a few questions ago, Grant Fisher, neighbor in flag. How long could you hang on, we'll say, the 5K record? How long, how many meters would you hang before dropping?
Yeah, so I would say most of our training right now is sort of geared toward a bit more speed endurance. And so like I can do like certain 5K training. I have done a lot of that in the past, but at the current moment, that's not really where my competitive advantage is, I would say. I have done weeks years ago where I was going 100-mile weeks, sort of basically thinking that I could just run myself into fitness. Like I could just get into incredible conditioning and kind of make it through the other side. And it didn't really work, but like it was kind of because that wasn't really how I wasn't really going about it the right way. I would say like if I trained for a 5K, I do think I could be nationally competitive in the 5K, just kind of looking back to how I competed in high school. I think that I have a lot of inclination to run the 15, and you have to be strong enough to run a 5K to be like nationally or globally competitive in the 15. So I know that's sort of a roundabout answer. I'd sort of focus on things more 800 pace, but I could easily make it 2 miles, probably 2.5 miles at that pace.
Speaking of those high school days, you were a stud back in the day, national record holder in the indoor 800 meter, if I'm not mistaken. But let's go back even further to the start in the sport of running. How'd you get started in the sport of running? What was it like growing in the family that you did? And what were your first impressions of the sport?
Yeah, so my first relationship with running was sort of as a punishment. So when we were wrestling too much or too rowdy, my parents would tell me and my brothers to go run around the cul-de-sac. And so like I have a lot of memories of chasing especially my older brother Jackson around the cul-de-sac. We also were entered in like various running camps growing up, because both of my parents ran collegiately. My mom at Penn State, my dad at LaSalle. And so they were sort of ushering us into running, but there was sort of a focus of like, we don't want them to get overexposed in this sport, because at the time it was like anyone who was doing well young seemed to not be able to hold on. So I played a lot of baseball growing up, and it wasn't really till like middle school that I started running track, and sort of under my dad's sort of guidance and my mom as well. But my dad has done a lot of the overseeing for my track career, and we sort of found out that I had a gift for it early, and so it was sort of high school where I did my first full year of track, cross country, indoor and outdoors.
With your brothers, what was that like competitive drive like growing up, and how much of your current drive do you feel like comes from those early days?
I would say a lot. My older brother has been my biggest inspiration when it comes to running, and he was always, especially throughout middle school and high school, like widely regarded as the toughest athlete that anybody knew, and especially that I knew. And so there was always like this, not only like physical aspiration to like run the times that he was running, but there was a strong sort of like moral or ethical motivation to run with the sort of heart, courage, and like power that he did. And so some of that was imposed by my dad as well. Like him, that has sort of been his life mantra of just trying to outwork people. And so, but it was really seeing that come to life, like in Jackson's running, that made me want to aspire to that. And even now, like we train together, and most of the time I'll do like go a little bit farther in a workout or a little bit faster, but there's like such a strong push, I would say, like from Jonah and Jackson, where it's like, if I'm not living up to that like moral or ethical standard of like how the training should be and like how you should be pushing and what sort of effort you should be giving, then I'm letting them down. And in the same way, it's like they sort of see me and they kind of aspire to that standard.
With that mindset and that in mind, in high school, how vicious were workouts? Were y'all like going at each other's throats, trying to run some crazy splits, crazy times?
Yeah, so I mostly did cross country, I would say, like in high school. Like that was the biggest focus for me. And so things could get pretty difficult, especially because Jackson, being 2 years older, would these are reps that are well over 2 minutes. Like there'll be Ks, 2 mile reps. And so a lot of memories of kind of being half a mile out, just kind of zeroed out and just trying to gut through the rest of the workout. But I don't necessarily think that was the most productive training method for me at the time, but it definitely shapes a lot of how I view things now.
What do you feel like, thinking back, looking back, what moment did you first experience your own greatness?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure I would put it that way, but I would say the first time where I realized I could be nationally competitive in track was my sophomore year of high school at the Penn Relays. That was the first national race that I had won. It was a mile. It was mostly, I would say, a sit and kick type race where maybe went through in about 2:10, and I closed in like 58 or like 56. I don't really remember, but that sort of win was like, as a sophomore, like it was like, man, maybe if we kind of continue pushing at this, like we'll get a scholarship to college and continue in that aspect. But I went on to run a lot of miles after that, like the Indoor Grand Prix, the Millrose Mile, things like that. And so like I was able to kind of win those races based on that experience from Penn Relays. So
do you feel like competing in those races at such a young age kind of helped you to focus more on competition and the tactics of winning, rather than like, not to hate on current high schoolers, I think a lot of them do it very well still, but there's definitely more of an emphasis on go to BU and run really fast and
so
time.
I definitely think that high schoolers are more impressive now than when I was in high school. I think that primarily the coaching has improved to such a level that was sort of not thought possible. When I was in high school, there was sort of this notion where you can't train a high school athlete like a professional athlete because their bodies will break down. But there has been so much adaptation and sort of knowledge where you can train high school athletes like a professional in slightly modified ways, where you can dial back the intensity, but have the same sort of structure that professionals do now. And so I think that kids are being developed a lot more early on. And I don't think that that's necessarily an issue. I think that you can absolutely stay athletically developed as you grow older and kind of compound your successes and growth just through as your physical body matures. But I would say that the kids who are running really fast now will still have to learn to be competitive in races, but there are a lot of very good people. And that is sort of a pressure that those kids are experiencing that a lot of other people haven't, where it's like, hey, there's a lot of kids that are running 4 minutes in the mile, sub 4. Like you have to be just as good, or if not better. So I think that track is only becoming more competitive. And I think that the tactics are becoming even fine on a finer margin. So I think that the sport itself is improving through these young kids.
Love that response there. Speaking of one of those young kids, Cooper Luttenhouse, who's been on the podcast twice, actually. I know you raced against him, funny enough, and I know you guys shared some words after you broke your own record. What's your take on a kid like that, and how insane is it to you that he's only a sophomore? What do you feel like his ceiling is? I mean, it's wild what he could potentially do.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously wildly impressive. My first thought when I saw him at Millrose was, I mean, he's taller than me. He's very strong. Yeah. So I only point that out because he has like the physical attributes to run really fast. And then he also has that conditioning. They seem to be very smart with their training, kind of alluding to what I was pointing at earlier. I also think that maybe some of the American audience, maybe I'm saying too much here, but they don't actually realize how a lot of the kids in Europe will run wicked fast at an earlier age. Like there's a lot of U20 guys that are running fast. And so I know I'm not providing a lot of examples, but it's not, in my opinion, unheard of for a 16-year-old kid to run 146. But I also think in like 5 to 6 years from now, 146 will be the standard for a high school athlete. So I just also think that it's a combined thing where it's like he's a phenomenal talent. He's a great physical specimen. I hope he continues to mature, and a lot of people will kind of use that standard to achieve similar levels.
Michael Granville's record has stood for quite some time now. I'm sure it was something you chased after back in the day. Is it on borrowed time, or is that a record that's just will last for a couple more years?
Personally, I'd be surprised if it's standing 3 years from now.
Bridging the gap between high school and college, at what point during those years did you realize that A, I can take this to the next level, and B, this is something that I really want to continue to pursue?
Yeah, I'll sort of answer that by going back to after that race where I ran 147 indoors. There was sort of an emphasis of like, hey, we can potentially go after the outdoor national record. I mean, a lot of people run faster outdoors than they do indoors. Like your time is almost a conversion to that thing. So we just got to not mess anything up. We were consulting with a coach at the time and sort of got away from a little bit what we were doing with my dad, sort of mitigating the workouts and definitely trained a bit too hard and ultimately didn't really realize my potential for that outdoor season. And so I would say, I was pretty disappointed. And following the U20 World Championships I competed in the summer, I was sort of thinking like, man, I might have screwed up like my opportunity to go professional. And then after the race, like where I was trying to make the final, I ended up being the last person out, but still just didn't really improve that much from the indoor season. It was like, I thought it wasn't going to be a bad path. I was still going to go to college and stuff, but I got presented with the opportunity to run professional. And for us, that was everything. It was like, we are trying to make it to that level. Getting to that level at a younger age will give us time to adapt and grow and learn and be a more experienced athlete earlier on. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that way, but ultimately, that's where our head and thought process was.
You've mentioned a few times in this conversation, like the importance of working hard. You mentioned kind of the common phrase from your dad about outworking others, but then also you've mentioned stories of, balancing that act and not, going too deep, too fast at times. How do you presently balance that? And how have you learned throughout the years what that dance is right on the line of doing too much, but also like being as fit as humanly possible?
Yeah. I mean, it comes down to risk management. You kind of have to understand where your different energy systems are, what you're trying to accomplish with each workout. And for us, we put a lot of the emphasis on those race specific speed endurance type 800 pace, sub 800 pace workouts. And so that's where we take the most risk. And risk being going a little bit further than we did before, or sort of risking blowing up and having to manage workouts at times of adding rest or cutting an interval. But we also don't let that take away from getting what we believe is the minimum necessary work for a national or globally competitive middle distance runner. And so we kind of look at what other people are doing either online or through the grapevine and sort of dose accordingly, and then take the most risk on those race specific days. So I would say one of my greatest strengths as an athlete is understanding those energy zones and kind of when to push and take risk. And I don't take risk all the time, like you're pointing out, but I do think that our program is sort of centered around running hard. Like that is the main concept.
What's your take on the current state of the 800 meters? I think in the US, like we've had some unique phases and eras recently. And, you go back to Doha in 2019, Brazier was so dominant, and then he kind of fell off without saying anything. And then, the invasion of Bryce Hoppel in this era, and now guys like you kind of also being a part of it. What's your current state, both on the US stage as well as just on the global stage? And, as an American, someone who takes pride in our sport and, wants to cheer on the best of the best here, like, how do you think we're going to get back to the top of the podium in this event?
As I've hinted earlier, the information gap about training has shrunk a lot. And I would mostly aspire that to Jakob. And I think that a lot of Jakob Ingebrigtsen's sort of ideas about training have actually permeated down and up. And I think that sort of the recent success in the 800 has sort of been overdue to a point where it's like you saw that breakthrough in the 1500 like 3 to 5 years ago, and now the 800 is kind of experiencing a similar boom through a bit more efficient aerobic techniques and sort of similarly dosing the anaerobic speed endurance type stuff. And so obviously that was the biggest boon for me, and so maybe I'm a little bit biased towards that, but I do think that the 800 is becoming a bit more of an aerobic event. It's objectively an aerobic event. But I think that as people get smarter with that, it's going to get a lot faster. I do think that the world record in the 800 will be broken in the next 3 to 5 years if it takes that long. It's currently the weakest distance record according to World Athletics. So there's sort of a natural thought process that that's going to get broken. As far as it comes to domestic running, I think that the U.S. has always had a lot of resources. It's had a lot of pretty good coaches. And I think that as that information gap goes down, like you're sort of seeing the U.S. capitalize like on that a lot more than even some of the other countries are able to, just from a resource standpoint. And so I think that the U.S. has some of the hardest working, like toughest runners in the world. And I know that a lot of Europeans don't see it that way. And it's going to be a rude awakening if they underestimate the U.S.
I love it. Some fighting words there, but I believe we'll back it up. Not that I have any ability to do that myself, as I never come even, you would have lapped me back in the day in the 800. But something I do want to ask you about in terms of the 800 is, you look at the different events and you look at, how many people get popped for doping at the highest level. The 800 is definitely an event where recent years, I feel like there's been more and more news of people testing positive or medals revoked or that kind of whole thing. For you, does that ever worry you in terms of like, you never want your hard work to go to waste? I'm not, throwing out any speculation of current competitors, but I've had this conversation with Bryce before, and my conversation with him on the podcast of like, what's your just general take on being in an event that generally is a little more dirty, you could say, just factually?
Yeah, I would say that first and foremost, like the U.S. has probably the best national anti-doping system, and you like our USADA versus WADA and stuff. But I think that the idea of doping is sort of to try and raise fitness faster than you could otherwise manage. And I actually think that there are a lot of people in the 800 that have recently proven that it is possible to be just as efficient, if not more, through like certain training techniques. Like I take a lot of inspiration from Marco and what I know about his training. So I would just say it doesn't actually worry me that much because first of all, it's not something I can control. And so I also have to put all of my energy into improving myself. So wherever that leads me, that's going to be like, that's for retrospect. but yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what else to say about that.
Focused on yourself. I love it. So this year, going through some of the performances, going into 2025, you kind of mentioned your mindset coming out of the trials. You kind of go on a tear. You break your own American indoor 800 meter record, win a first national championship at the 2025 USATF Indoor Championships. You ran 145.23. Like, what's your general mindset, and how do you feel? Where do you feel this momentum is taking you going into China World Champs in a few weeks?
I'm just kind of focused on trying to compete as well as I can in China and kind of go from there. Coming out of the outdoor season last year, I was kind of feeling a little trapped because like I didn't really have a lot of race opportunities, being only fourth in the U.S., making it very difficult to try and compete at the international level. I had already been competing at sort of the national level throughout the outdoor season, and we were trying to make a significant jump. And so it was like I can't really afford to kind of take a break and just kind of go about things as I were, because I would then be trapped in the same spot with limited race opportunity. And so like that whole sort of mindset was to try and run well enough indoors to maybe open opportunities that wouldn't have been there if we had taken indoors easier. And so we're still trying to explore opportunities in that light, but like I just continue with that same mindset of trying to be at my best for most of the year, just to capitalize on those opportunities if and when they come.
What would you say excites you most about your own running currently?
I think what excites me the most is the outreach, the amount of people that have kind of come to me already and said that they're excited about my story, the way I run. And to me, it just makes me want to give those people hope. And so I just sort of continue just to press with that same idea.
In your notes, you wrote, I've heard some people say, quote, this guy is coming out of nowhere, end quote, which really underestimates my success as a junior. And then you said, I also believe that I'm one of the more knowledgeable athletes on the circuit when it comes to training. And you kind of went into both of these things in this conversation thus far, which I've really appreciated. But to that first point, this guy has come out of nowhere. Can you give some greater context to people out there listening? Specifically, we definitely have a younger listening base. And I think this is a good, inspiring message of like, there is no such thing as breakthroughs. It is years of hard work that really culminate in the performances you see. And probably things you did in training 3-4 years ago have added up and culminated in some of the races you're running today. And that's not to take away from your recent training, but I think you would probably agree with me. And if you don't, please let me know. Like, there's probably no one workout that made you US champion or like made you run the times you've run. It's this consistent output for years on end that's made you who you are.
I definitely think so. And I think part of that mindset that I was talking about of coming out of nowhere is I feel like that comes from the seeing is believing. And like these people are like, oh, if he's run a little bit or if he's run that fast, then I believe that he has run that fast. And I understand, like I have become cynical like that as well. But like, I think as an athlete who's competing, and this is sort of a message to the high school people and people listening who kind of feel trapped. Like if you know that you have that talent and you've seen it in yourself and you've had coaches support you, like you have to believe in the goal outside of where you are now. And that has to kind of inspire you to kind of push past what other people say your limits are. And you have to be really smart. And that's kind of why I said that in the second part of that quote, is just because like it's taken a lot of self-management and a lot of knowledge about how my body responds to training specifically, and especially when it comes to injury prevention, of being able to sustain that pace. But at the same time, like, no, I don't really believe anyone comes out of nowhere. You just don't see them until you do. And so, yeah, you just have to believe.
Where would you put yourself in relation to that quote you just said there? Like, you see them when you see them. Like, no one comes out of nowhere.
I think the biggest test for me was Millrose this year. I had a lot of nerves going into that race, going up against Bryce, who's such an amazing competitor, who's has been rarely beaten in the 800, especially when it comes to the U.S. Like I was kind of a wreck, like going into that, but yeah, I mean, that to me, that was sort of like the final exam of the winter training block. And so I think after like going into that race, knowing that I probably had to run hard from the front because I knew I had to rely on that conditioning that I did throughout the fall. That was like, it's make or break with if the fall worked or not. Um, and so once that worked, it was like, okay, I'm sure other people kind of saw that, but I was also like, I think I can do better with that, because like looking at the 1,000 that I did, which we did more as like a training exercise, I was looking, and my World Athletics points was basically the exact same for the 1,000 as it was for the Millrose time. And I'm like, how can I not have improved over the last like 3 to 4 weeks? I've tapered more, like, and I was just kind of discouraged about that. And so going into USA's, like, my focus was just trying to run a personal best, was not to like kind of slow down in the middle of that race. Like I had to do a little bit for Millrose because I wasn't even sure if I was going to make it to the finish line at that pace. But yeah, so I was, maybe people saw USA's as well, but I'm just talking about kind of my mindset going into those.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway that someone listening can take away from your story? Like the biggest learning you want people when they see the name Josh Hoey, they hear your story on the podcast today. What's the biggest takeaway, you want people to take away from your story?
I hope people see that it's possible to push past the point where other people have given up on you. I've had a lot of previous coaches and other people in the community that have said he's done. Like he was good in high school, but he's kind of cooked. But obviously my parents have believed in me, so I've had tremendous support. But if I can inspire someone to relentlessly pursue that gift that they feel like God has given them for a reason, then I'll have achieved my mission for this year.
Love it, man. Love the mindset. Final serious question for you. For someone listening today, what's the final takeaway message that you want to leave with them? Specifically, I would say speak to someone's who's younger and like wants to chase after things. Maybe they won't run 143 one day, but they at least want to train like it and give it a shot and do everything in their power to be good at the running thing.
Yeah, my main message is that there's a tremendous amount of information out there that you can train like a professional, and you can make it a lot farther than you really think of. I mean, track is undergoing, I would say, a revolution when it comes to times, and things are just getting better and better. And so if you can better yourself by being a part of that movement, then I would encourage you to just go for it.
Josh, final question for you. The question I ask every single guest on every single podcast: if you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you personally choose to make for him?
So my younger brother is a tremendous cook. He studies it and has tried to teach me a lot. And I think I would try and use that knowledge to make a beef Wellington and add it to the list of inferior beef Wellingtons. But at least I would know how far behind I am.
Fancy. Other fun question for you, closing this one out. What do you tell the barber? You've got some of the slickest hair on the circuit. What do you tell the barber when you go into the barber shop? And how much is too much for a men's haircut?
First of all, 2 on the sides, blend it into the top. And too much, I'm not sure 50 is too much for a haircut, but if you like trust in a barber, like the quality can be worth the money. So I just, yeah.
Wise words. Ladies and gentlemen, Josh Hoey. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been awesome to see all the recent results, and specifically someone who hasn't given up on themselves and their dreams and their goals, and specifically hearing some of the behind the scenes, hearing about your faith, you being a man of God, is super inspiring. So keep crushing it. Go kill it in China, and excited to continue to root you on and all that you do.
Thanks for having me.